Yeah, hi all. Yeah. So next we are going to discuss about at the rate controller annotation. So like basically the at the rate controller annotation is the specification of at the rate component annotation, and the component annotation come under stereotype annotation. So stereotype annotations are like kind of a specific type of annotation that can be used to mark classes as having a particular role or purpose within the application. So basically stereotype annotations give or or like fulfill a particular role to the application. So the main stereotype component is like at the rate component annotation, and at the rate controller, at the rate service, at the rate repository. All these annotations are the specification of at the rate component annotation, right? So basically today we are going to discuss about the controller annotation, and we are going to see what is at the rate controller annotation and how to use this in your Spring Boot application. So yeah, so at the rate controller annotation is the part of a Spring framework, okay, and like especially used in the context of building web application with a Spring MVC model. So when applied to a class, at the rate controller annotation indicate that the class serve as a controller in a MVC architecture, and we know that the first point of interaction for MVC project is a controller, right? So in a Spring, controller is the very first point of interaction. When we put a request to a Spring project, then controller is the first point of contact. So in Spring MVC, the controllers are responsible for handling user requests and kind of like processing them and returning an appropriate response, right? So controller annotation is used to mark a class as a Spring MVC controller, and these annotations is typically placed on a class label, and it works in a conjunction with the other annotations like at the rate request mapping or at the rate so like at the rate request mapping to define URL mapping for handling specific HTTP request. Yeah, so like all these things we are going to see in an example. So basically at the rate controller annotation is going to mark a class as a controller. So in MVC we have a different layers, right? We have a controller layer, we have a service layer, we have a repository. So to divide this layer, we use different annotations. To make any Java class as a controller layer, we mark with at the rate controller annotation, right? And it is the very first contact of your request to a Spring like application. So now let's move ahead to our Eclipse or IntelliJ, and let's see how we can add at the rate controller to see how it works, right? So first, so already we have a controller here package. Now first I'm going to create a new class. Let's say name employee controller. So this is a simple Java class I have created. Now if I want to make this controller, mm, to make this Java class as a controller, then I have to mark this with at the rate controller annotation, and you can see that at the rate controller annotation is coming from stereotype package. So let me import it. So now by adding at the rate controller, I have marked this simple Java class as a controller and divided this Java into a controller layer, right? So now as the Spring container will start up, then at that time our Spring container will read this class, and it will segregate this, and it will keep it classes wherever we are using the controller. So it will mark this as an controller class. Now in the controller class we know that we create the endpoints. So for now I am going to create an endpoint and then show you how it is the very first point of interaction, right? So for that, so let me create a public a method with a string data type. Let's say method name as employee detail. So get employee detail is my method name, and here I'm going to pass a dummy a response. Let's say employee name Asis, right? So this is the yeah, so this is the dummy string I am passing. So now we have to yeah, so this is the endpoints. To make this as an endpoint, I am going to use the getter method, the get mapping method. But in this project, if you will see, I have created a simple like a Spring Boot project. But here in the pom.xml, if you'll see, I am not using any like wave like package or wave dependency, right? So let me add a wave dependency in this pom.xml. Yeah, so this is a Spring dash boot dash starter dash wave. So this will make means this will import all the wave related import to my project. So let me load this Maven, and after clicking you can see that this package is getting download, and then it will get stored as a jar. Okay, so I have imported successfully the wave module through like Maven through pom.xml. Now let's go to our employee controller, and here I have to call this endpoint through a getter method. So we yeah, so now you can see that we are getting get mapping method, right? So get yeah, so like about the get mapping method we are going to understand into the later part of our lectures. So for now you just understand that we use this get mapping annotation for calling this endpoint with a getter method. You know that we have a different http method, like right, get, post, put, delete. So this is a get method, and here in the mapping you need to provide the url. So let me put get employee detail, something like that. Yeah, so get employee detail is my employee name. Yep, so like I mean the url name, and this is the simple return type. So let me save this class. Yeah, now I will start this project. So before start, let's us go to the main class, and here I have done some changes previous lectures. So let me comment this out. Now I want to start this main class as a Spring Boot project, so I need to run only this main class, right? When I run this main class, then you will see that Tomcat is our default server, and it has been started at port number 8080, right? And now I have created a controller class with the name employee controller, marked controller as an annotation, and there is one endpoint with the URL get employee detail. So I need to call this endpoint. So I will use Postman to call this endpoint, and then it should return this dummy string. So I will use Postman for this situation. Yeah, so here you can see that already I have done. Yeah, so this is the getter method, and here localhost 8080 and get employee detail. So let me put a send button. So when I did a send button, I'm getting get employee. Okay, let me go and then call this. Let me paste it here. Let me send it. Okay, we are still getting not found. Okay, here we are using at the red controller, and here we are returning a string. So we have to define here the response type. So for that we have another like annotation response body. So we need to use this annotation response body which is coming from the wave like module itself. Yeah, So regarding this response body, we are going to understand into the further lectures. But for now, you have to use at the response body annotation if you are using at the red controller, right? So now let me again restart this project. Yeah. And also you are going to learn about at the rate rest controller. So basically at the rate rest controller is a combination of controller and the response body. Yeah. So that also I'm going to like tell you and show you by example into a very depth manner into the future lectures. But now I have restarted my application and now let's hit send button to my postman. Yeah, and now you can see I'm getting a response, employee name Asis, and we got 200 okay response. It means we are able to call this. So basically, what is happening when I'm calling means when I'm sending this request into my local host 8080, my application is like serve, right? When application is serve and this request is going, first it will check in which controller these URL is there, right? So there can be n number of controller in the real time application, and for that there can be n number of endpoints, right? But here for the showcase purpose I have only created one controller and one endpoint. Yeah, so this is the first it will find out that okay, these is the endpoint which it need to be called, because it will match with this URL, and then it will go to this method, and then it will find that it is returning a simply dummy string, so it will give in a response as a dummy string, right? Yeah. So this is all about at the red controller. Basically at the red controller is a stereotype annotation, which is a specification of at the red component. So if you will go inside this controller, you will see that it is annotated with component.class. It means it is a specification of a component annotation also, right? Yeah, so this is all about at the red controller, which is used to mark means separate this Java class to a controller layer, right? Yeah. So thank you and have a nice day.